It's time for another episode of another number one hit from the 1980s. I can't wait to get into this one. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Douglas. Welcome to another episode of Dr. Pundit, where we talk about music, not medicine. And this is actually the first episode in which I will also add to that tagline, no YouTube shorts. On this channel, it's all full-length, quality videos. I think YouTube shorts are great, but not for this channel. So let's get into it. What would the 1980s be without Phil Collins? More importantly, what would the 1980s be without his number one hit, Sussudio? Phil Collins is known for many hit singles. Sussudio is just one of them. He's even known for In the Air Tonight, a song from his LP Face Value that totally should have been a top 10 hit, but wasn't. That song is well known, if not the very least, for the awesome drum solo near the climax of the song. I will be talking about that in a later episode, but on this particular episode, it's all about 80s number one hits, and Sussudio was definitely his funnest and most 80s, for lack of a better term, than any of his number one hits. And I want to get into it right now. Sussudio hit number one in 1985, the week of July 6, and stayed there for a week. Let's face it, Sussudio is gibberish. That's the best thing about it. Gibberish kicks ass. There's a long, distinguished history of gibberish within pop music, one that includes artists like Little Richard, for example. See what I mean? Pop music is an art dedicated to hormones and crushes and longings and the eternal struggle to starve boredom. The words don't have to make sense. They don't even have to be words. With Sussudio, Phil Collins made up a word, built music around a word, and then made a song from that word. That song turned out to be his third consecutive number one single. If you're capable of doing that, then why do you even need language? But Sussudio just doesn't discard language. It also laughs in the face of time itself. Now consider this lyric. Now I know that I'm too young. My life has just begun. When Sussudio hit number one, Phil Collins was 34 years old, and he looked at least 10 years older than that. And actually, yeah, I thought he was around 40 or so. You have to respect the audacity for even to come up with a word, much less a song called Sussudio, right? But I'm glad he did. And when he wrote Sussudio, he was well aware that his public image was that of what he called a, quote, miserable sod, as he said in an interview with Billboard magazine. Collins wanted to do something about that. He didn't have to, but he felt the need to. He resolved to make an album of up-tempo dance tracks, or at least an album with a few up-tempo dance tracks, and it worked out. No Jacket Required was a huge record. And even after hitting number one with the, quote, sad bastard ballads, as he would call them, Against All Odds, a movie hit, and One More Night, both number one hits, Collins managed to get himself out of the sad bastard balladeer territory. Collins wrote Sussudio the way he wrote a lot of his songs, by playing around with a drum machine, coming up with an idea, and then writing to that idea. Now in this case, Collins was improvising, coming up with melodic ideas by singing nonsense over his own beat. Incidentally, this is how a lot of rappers create music. Collins came up with the Sussudio hook, thinking he'd go back to that non-word with something that meant something, but he really couldn't think of anything else that fit the track as well. So he kept the gibberish and worked around it. If you delve into the lyrics, Sussudio is a song about being a kid with a crush, or at least that's the vague lyrical framework that Collins came up with. Now you have to realize that Sussudio is implicitly fiction, which is why Collins could sing about being just too young, right? I mean, he was 34. But Sussudio is really more about a groove and about how much fun it can be to wail to a groove. Nobody's ever going to identify with the Sussudio lyrics because it really didn't matter. Instead, what makes the track stand out is the funky, glistening, state-of-the-art, big 80s bounce of that track. That is why it is so appealing. Collins threw a whole lot at his big beat. A monster synth bass wobble, some Nile Rodgers-like guitar stretches, a lot of complicated and exhortative, I guess, horn stab action reminiscent of Earth, Wind, and Fire. Now, everyone knows that Phil Collins is a drummer, but there are no actual drums on Sussudio. Instead, Collins put together a groove on a drum machine, and he brought in an expert to help him with the rest. David Frank, the non-singing half of the dance pop duo from the early to mid-80s, The System, played the synths, played the mini Moog bass, and the DMX drum machine. Now, for all of you who don't know, The System was a big synth R&B hit from the early to mid-1980s. Their highest charting single was a #4 hit from 1987 called Don't Disturb the Groove. It was a #1 R&B hit that year. Now, Frank is the reason the bass hits the way that it does. In fact, the only non-electric instruments on the track Sussudio are the guitars and the horns, and even the guitars sound pretty synthy. The horns, if you listen closely, really don't. In making funky dance pop, Collins committed the same sin as almost everyone else did who made funky dance pop in the mid-1980s, the peak era for such a move. He bit Prince. Specifically, he took the groove, the tempo, the tumbling drum sound, the giddy synth riff of Prince's hit 1999 from 2 years earlier. That song peaked at #12. But Prince has never, ever, to my knowledge, or any other music historian, I guess, said anything public about the similarities between 1999 and Sussudio. If you wanted to know how his mind works, please check out this video about his conscience egging him on to get in touch with Neil Schon and Jonathan Cain from Journey to say, hey, does my track Purple Rain sound like your track Faithfully? Okay, now that's beside the point. But if such a move happened today, I think a lot more people would notice, and I think Prince would definitely reach out to Phil Collins and ask for a songwriting credit on that one. But that's neither here nor there. Collins has insisted that he wasn't, quote, plagiarizing black music with this song, which was a big deal at the time. Sussudio was a top 20 R&B hit as well. But he has acknowledged that the two songs aren't that far apart, 1999 and Sussudio. He would say, I'd love to sound like Prince. And in fact, an earlier demo of Sussudio sounded even more like 1999. But Collins did tweak the song so that it would be at least a little bit different. In any case, I'm not mad at having another song that sounds a lot like 1999 in the 80s canon of hit music. Even if one groove is a distinct copy of another, everything else is different. Maybe it's best to think of Sussudio as a kind of mixtape freestyle. Collins comes up with a whole different melody, and he really belts out that melody with conviction. He gives his voice a workout on the track, and he hits the high notes and the hard notes without ever attempting to be too R&B, which makes this track even more appealing. He sounds extremely exuberant, and if he couldn't be any happier singing something other than another sad bastard ballad. There are sharp little hooks strung along the song Sussudio. The way Collins gasps his way to the bridge, the stuttery joy of the meaningless title, all those things But those Earth, Wind, and Fire style horns go just crazy. They go ballistic. And that brings a busy fanfare that really powers the air when you listen to it, and it is truly infectious. Sussudio is not a transcendent classic or anything like that. He doesn't even want it to be, but it's just a goofy, fun, kick-ass jam, and God knows there are never enough of those in the world. Now, for the Sussudio video, Collins returned to the same Richard Branson-owned pub where he'd shot the clip for his #1 hit, One More Night, also from the LP No Jacket Required. This time, though, Collins wasn't howling out his troubles after closing time. Instead, he was confronted with a packed but apathetic house. Now, we don't know what he's been doing before he starts singing Sussudio in the video, or why he's wearing a double-breasted business suit, but we do know that it hasn't been working. Even in his own videos, Phil Collins can't really get respect. I mean, middle-aged white guy singing this song, right? But Sussudio changes all of that, and Collins pulls out the classic movie trick of convincing you that you like a performance by seeing a bunch of people in a crowd gradually deciding like they like the performance. Hey, I mean, it worked on me as a viewer, right? Collins had a crap load of hits well after Sussudio, and one could say that this marked the apotheosis, is that the right word? The apex of his 1980s or even his whole post-Genesis career in terms of hits. 1 week after Sussudio hit #1 in the US, Collins pulled off a wild publicity stunt, and even I remember this. He became the only artist to play both Live Aid shows. So Bob Geldof, the organizer for Live Aid, a massive fundraising global TV show that was set to air from 2 different continents in an effort for famine relief, among other charities, had shows airing in both London and Philadelphia. And they were happening on the same day. Collins played both of those shows. At the Wembley Stadium in London, Collins played a few songs with his friend and collaborator Sting, whom he met while recording Do They Know It's Christmas, kind of the answer to the US version of We Are the World. Then Collins made a beeline for the Concorde jet, flew to Philadelphia, and made it to JFK Stadium in just enough time to sing a couple of his own songs and play the drums for another friend and collaborator, Eric Clapton. Then, in his final Live Aid act, Phil Collins played drums for Led Zeppelin. If you don't believe me, just Google all of this. It was just amazing that it happened. Just incredible. But it really just kind of stopped there. I mean, the logistics behind the whole thing. Zeppelin had broken up 5 years earlier when drummer John Bonham had died, quite famously. The Live Aid reunion was their first time playing together since his death. And both Phil Collins and Chic Power Station drummer Tony Thompson filled in for Bonham. Unfortunately, in the 3-song performance, there really wasn't a memorable vibe to it. And many people blamed Phil Collins for that. For his part, unfortunately, Phil Collins blamed Tony Thompson. The Zeppelin members pretty much disowned that performance, and they've only performed a handful of times since then, Jimmy Page, Robert Plant. And at those occasions, Collins never was invited back, but I really don't think he ever even made a move to try to be part of those performances. Just a side note, Led Zeppelin's highest charted single, Whole Lotta Love, hit #4 in 1969, but they had a lot of course, non-album tracks that were much more popular and better known. Now, the hubris of the Live Aid stunt was not Phil Collins' downfall. No Jacket Required made its mark with more top 10 singles after Sussudio. Don't Lose My Number peaked at #4. I think that should have been a #1 hit. Take Me Home peaked at #7. All in all, Sussudio is a track that I think epitomizes the peak indulgence of the 1980s, the mid-1980s, the peak of that percussion, synth-driven horn movement. It just all came crashing to the masses at that point. And steadily, as we made our way toward the 1990s, it died down, but was replaced by other emerging dance trends, which is a pretty good way of looking like that. And if I were Phil Collins, I'd be pretty damn happy at my accomplishment of this #1 song right smack dab in the middle of the 1980s, July of 1985. How much of a bisection does it get than that? Phil Collins, a #1 hit from 1985, Sussudio. I'm Michael Douglas, and if you like what you see on this channel, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe. And as the late great Barry White always used to say, let the music play. And I'll see you on the next video.